Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a preview for the little two-game showdown slate that we've got tonight. So gonna take a look at it both from the main slate and the showdown perspectives to give you an idea of how to attack each game and hopefully find your name towards the top of some of those large field contests. Most of my exposure tonight and what I'm posting projection-wise and what you'll see on the video is going to be for the two-game main slate, but just know we'll talk through some game scripts, a few ways to attack each game. So in case you're just looking at it from the single game perspective, we'll have some insight for you there as well. But a lot to talk about with the two games on the docket tonight. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. So two relatively low scoring games that we have at our disposal, and you're not really going to want to play a quarterback, right? But unfortunately, because it is a main slate, or at least if you're playing over there on the classic side, you can't just play all running backs, defenses, and kickers. So at the quarterback position, you get a little bit of, I would say, concentrated ownership on your top two options. Guys like Deshaun Watson, Derek Carr are the clear favorites at quarterback, and it's not just because, people love a Derek Carr or Deshaun Watson. It's a lot of the pairing options that you can mix in with them. A lot of the top tier receivers on New Orleans tend to be a little bit more consistent, more predictable offense over there on that side. Pretty much the same thing with Deshaun Watson. They have the highest implied team totals, as of course the Browns and the Saints are the two favorites in the two games that you have tonight. But let's remember that they're just 39.5 point totals, right? It's volatile. They're just 3-point spreads, right, over there for each team respectively. These quarterbacks like a Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, that also bring a little bit of rushing upside to the table are just as live in large field GPPs. So if we're talking about showdown, if we're talking about main slate, it's pretty much the same thing regardless of the slate that you're entering. Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, if you're looking for leverage, are the teams that you want to look at. But just going quarterback by quarterback, Deshaun Watson is of course your highest owned quarterback, and I think the one that's most likely to bust out there. The Browns offense is centered around their rushing attack, and unless Deshaun Watson is scoring touchdowns, a lot of times he has a hard time getting to that ceiling performance. So last year you saw him struggle, especially in this type of offense, and maybe they are going to look a little bit different here in 2023, but it's much too early to be making those kind of determinations. So $6,400, I'm okay with the play, especially in like a single entry or cash, but in large field GBPs as the highest owned player, if you're mixing him in with a Chubb or one of the wide receivers for the Browns, you're talking about the highest owned options on the entire slate. Just makes it a little bit tough from that perspective. We'll talk about the wide receivers later, especially Amari Cooper, who's going to be a huge question mark for tonight's slate. You have a few reports saying that he will play, including Joe Buck, who just came out like 10 minutes ago and said that he would play this week, Amari Cooper, and then a lot of conflicting reports that are saying the exact opposite. So some intrigue there with Deshaun Watson, especially if Amari Cooper plays. Maybe you can get him at lower ownership, but we'll have to see about all that, right? That'll be determined later, and my projections, of course, will account for that once we get that definitive news. Derek Carr, another favorite tonight, and I think probably the most predictable offense that we have. Without options like Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller is expected to sit tonight. Still technically questionable, so could get rolled in if he feels a little bit better this evening. But as of right now, the common sentiment from Adam Schefter is that he's not going to play. So for Derek Carr, he's got Jamal Williams at running back. Pretty much no one else. I guess Tony Jones would be your backup running back. Only got one touch in week 1. And a wide receiver, you have a few really concentrated options, right? Olave, who's probably your most popular wide receiver, Michael Thomas, and then at tight end, Juwan Johnson, right? You could throw Rashid Shaheed in there as a potential number 4 wide receiver option, or say receiving option, right? Of course, Juwan Johnson's a tight end, but they're rarely predictable. We kind of know what to expect there. We don't have a lot of competition at running back. And if you're looking for a cash play for this slate, I think it's probably the Saints and Derek Carr, right? He's the most predictable. I think he has the highest floor of any of the quarterbacks out here. He's going to post yardage, probably score at least one passing touchdown, which in cash is kind of what you're looking for. Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, I mentioned it as potential leverage options. If I was going to choose one, and of course I'm an extremely biased Steelers fan, it would be Kenny Pickett, right? The ownership I think is fair, right? 19.1%. You have lower ownership on Bryce Young, but one thing we know about the Steelers is that they are willing to throw the ball, right? You saw that week 1 in a negative game script. If you think the Browns are going to win tonight, tonight. And even as a really biased Steeler fan, I still think that the Browns are going to beat us tonight. You know, Kenny Pickett has to be an intriguing option, right? In negative game scripts, it's going to be forced to throw the ball down the field. So for as much as Matt Canada doesn't want this team to throw the ball more than 5 yards downfield, they are forced into a lot of those situations. And last week, they were most effective when they were in that situation, right? When they were forced into, perhaps it was softer coverage from the 49ers side. But either way, when Kenny Pickett was forced to throw it 10, 15 yards down the field, he had a higher completion percentage when it was all these little dump offs and screens. And of course, that led to more efficiency as well. So I think he's got upside, especially if people want to throw him to the dirt after the week 1 performance. There's a huge difference between that 49ers defense and then what he's going to face this week with the Browns. And the Browns are by no means a pushover defense. I think they'll be a top 5 unit this year, in fact, but they're not the 49ers. 49ers will be by far the best defense that anyone plays this year. So I think to unfairly judge somebody like KP8 after one start might be a little bit of an overreaction, right? It's remember, right? It's week 2 of the NFL season. So if you're looking for leverage, I mean, Bryce Young, you could throw into that argument too, right? He didn't have all that much production in week 1. Then get to them as leverage in large field GPPs. If you're not worried about ownership, you're willing to differentiate with one of the other 9 spots in your lineup, or at least maybe 2, 3, then take a Deshaun Watson or a chalkier Derek Carr stack, right? All kind of depends with what you plan to do with the rest of your lineup. Next up at the running back position, a few things to note here. Kendre Miller I have listed as questionable right now, but we did get a report just about an hour ago that he's likely to sit tonight, so I have him projected for 0 fantasy points. And then outside of that, not all that many moving pieces, right? You've got Nick Chubb, who's 75% owned, who's unbelievably chalky, and in fact, I think if you want to fade the ownership, just go out there, fade the 75%. But I don't think you have to, right? You could still play them under the field, and I think that's viable. I think a lot of people have this thought that, you know, even if you're building like 20 lineups, especially if you're building 150 lineups, that you have to go out there and like get leverage or take no, 0% of any given player. That's not the case with like a Nick Chubb, right? You don't have to play him in every lineup tonight or 0% of lineups, right? And there will be touts out there that kind of tell you that that's the case. Like you either have to full fade Nick Chubb or go out there and play him. You can take under the field. I'll be the one to tell you that that's perfectly fine, that plenty of high dollar, extremely experienced DFS players do this on a nightly basis, not just with like a crazy spot here like Nick Chubb. We'll just take under the field of the guy, right? That's a spot that you can take. Just know that that's okay. And if you're playing 150 lineups, you can get plenty of exposure to Nick Chubb tonight in case he goes off and still have under the field on him, right? To where like you're not completely screwed if he goes out there and breaks the slate. But if you're under the field and he doesn't play all that well, right, you still have maybe half your lineups to work with, or maybe even more than that to work with out there fading him too. So like, at least for me, that's kind of what I see myself doing tonight. And I'm kind of sick and tired of hearing people saying out there that you have to get like 2x of every player in the field. That's not the case when somebody is 75% owned. It's a completely different thought process. And I think there's a really good argument for full fading him tonight, especially if you're somebody that thinks the Steelers defense can hold up. But I'll just tell you, against CMC last week as a Steelers fan, they couldn't stop a plug if their life depended on it, right? And they were at home last week against the 49ers. So I know if people are like, oh, they're at home this week, they'll turn it around, so on and so forth. I'm not really all that sure about it. And again, I'm an extremely biased Steelers fan. Najee Harris, intriguing at slightly lower ownership, but he's still 45% owned. So we'll see as the ownership projections kind of mature throughout the day where he ends up when it comes to a flex ownership position. But if he's 44.9% owned, I might kind of avoid that, because I think players like Jaylen Warren, for example, especially if the Steelers are losing, have more upside, right? He has, at least in my opinion, more rushing upside, more home run play threat. Like he could score that 50, 60-yard touchdown. Najee Harris doesn't have the top end speed to score like a 70-yard touchdown. Like he'll break away from the first 3-4 tackles and then he'll get caught by somebody, right? He doesn't have that 20, 25 mile an hour top end speed like you'll get from a Jaylen Warren, who can just run away from a defense. So I actually like Jaylen Warren a little bit more, especially if you do think that the Browns are going to play well tonight. Perhaps if you are playing a Nick Chubb, I think that correlates with somebody like Jaylen Warren playing well, right? Because Nick Chubb's going to get more carries in a Browns heavy script, and Jaylen Warren's going to play more, right, in a Browns heavy script, kind of like what you saw last week against the 49ers. So I think that at running back, right, there's some chalky chalk you can take, but also plenty of spots to differentiate here. Miles Sanders, Jamal Williams, same kind of play as a Najee Harris, right? Like they're getting moderate ownership. Jamal Williams may actually go up in ownership once we get the official news on a Kendre Miller. So at running back, there are some chalky pieces you can take, but I think where you're going to win or lose the slate, right, are with some of these backup options. So Jalen Warren, Chuba Hubbard, right, same kind of guy. He's that more receiving type of number 2 to a Miles Sanders, who's the clear number 1. Jerome Ford even got touches for the Browns last week in a competitive game, right? So you could take him at $4,400. These players project well worse, right, than their counterparts. Like, don't get me wrong, but in a large field contest, GPP, right, where you're trying to win, but also win without duplicating yourself and giving yourself leverage to the field, you have to embrace the volatility. I mentioned this being a showdown slate on steroids, and what I mean by that is when you only have 2 games to work with, right? There are only so many touchdowns to go around. You're going to have that one random player that breaks the slate. It happens every single time that we play one of these 2-game slates, and it's normally a wide receiver or a tight end. So it could be a running back. You know, I mentioned a few names there, but where you're going to win or lose the GPPs are here with these wide receivers and tight ends. Before we hop into a breakdown of both of these positions, just want to remind you guys, if you're looking for access to all of the spreadsheets that you see in my videos, I do them for every single island game, all of the different main slates that we have, like we have, you know, for Sunday every week, and of course for the main slate here. Check out my Patreon page. There's a link down below in the description. On there, you can get access to DFS projections, both for golf and for NFL, and all the different prop content that I'm posting as well. I'm constantly posting prop slips over there. This last weekend was an absolute print fest, both for main slate and over there for the prop side. So make sure to check it out if you've been looking for access to what you're seeing used in my videos here. Of course, it's what I use for my process. It's what I'd recommend a lot of you out there using as well. Just makes it real simple, just gives you all the information you need for any given slate and not any extra fluff out there, right? I spend a lot of time on my projections. They're updated for, you know, different injuries that occur, different usage rates that'll change, right? If Amari Cooper gets, you know, rolled in, for example, right, that doesn't just change his projection, that has a huge impact on Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, heck, even the tight ends out there like Njoku, Harrison Bryant, right, have impacts by Amari Cooper coming back. And it's not all negative. Some players actually benefit from having that number 1 to distract other players. So like, there's a lot of different things that change. You know, snap shares might change, but the overall efficiency for the Browns goes way up with Amari Cooper back, right? Even if it's not him putting up the production, you know, him, again, making other players around him more efficient, maybe that makes the Browns, you know, more competitive. Maybe they win a little bit more handedly tonight. That helps Nick Chubb out, right? So there's a lot of different changes that go into the projections. If you want them as they change throughout the week, make sure to check out the Patreon too, right? I'm constantly updating them on there. Shameless plug aside now, let's hop back into this. So at wide receiver, there are, you know, some clear-cut chalky options, right? Like Chris Olave is going to be ridiculously chalky. Kind of like Nick Chubb, nearly 75% owned. You got guys like, you know, Michael Thomas, George Pickens, Elijah Moore, I think will get slightly less chalky if Amari Cooper plays. But like, then you have this middle tier of ownership too, right? You can always make the game theory pivot for or against Chris Olave. But once again, I'll tell you, if you just want to take under the field, don't feel like that's a sin. Like, you can't do that out there with Chris Olave. You 100% can take under the field on somebody that's 73, 75% owned. So don't be afraid of that kind of stand. That's probably where I see myself tonight. Again, I don't want to win or lose the slate because Chris Olave goes off, right? In either direction, right? In the positive or the negative direction. I get the play. I understand why he's getting the attention, but I'm not locking him at that kind of price tag. Michael Thomas, George Pickens, even like this Allen Robinson, Elijah Moore tier, like you got to pick your spots here. There are some really intriguing value tier and leverage options here that are a little bit cheaper though. So like, for example, an Adam Thielen, a Jonathan Mingo, right? If DJ Chark ends up getting rolled out, they would be even more intriguing at those kind of price tags. The Calvin Austin for the Steelers, without Deontay Johnson, he's going to play a whole lot more for that Steelers offense. In fact, I think he played almost every snap after Deontay Johnson went out last week. I don't know how many people know that about Calvin Austin other than Steeler fans like myself. So it might be a little bit of a coming out party for him, somebody that is one of the most explosive players in the NFL. You'll see him tonight. You'll get to see him on national TV. The kid he's like Tyreek Hill with his speed. Literally, he's that kind of fast. He's like that Douglas guy last night for the Patriots. You'll get to see that with CA3, as a few people are calling him. You got Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think you could take for some leverage down here. You got some backup wide receivers for the Panthers if you really want to be sick tonight and go down here and take a pure flyer play. But it's like the Mingos, it's the Thielens, it's potentially the Calvin Austins, right, that are going to win you this slate. I talked about a complete random going out there and breaking it. Well, maybe it's Shaheed catching a 60-yard touchdown. Guy does that all the time, right? But he is 30% owned. That same kind of play could be a Thielen. It could be a Mingo at 7%. It could be an Austin catching a fly route, who in the preseason, by the way, I think it was the first preseason game, caught a fly route for a touchdown from Kenny Pickett. If he does that at $3,500, you have to have him, right? And he may outscore like the George Pickens, the Elijah Moores of the world. That is well within somebody like a Calvin Austin's range of outcomes, and is why like these kind of plays, and I'll just tell you, he's definitely going to be in my player pool. Of course, guys, the player pool is posted on my Patreon, right? It's not blacked out over there. He'll 100% be in my player pool. He's one of the guys I think that could win you all the money tonight, whether it's in a large field GPP or a smaller field contest. And then over here, tight end, there's not that much chalk, actually. Like, Njoku's 37%, like, that's fine. 31, 32% there on Pat Freiermuth, like, that's fine, too. I don't know. You don't have to get cute here. You could take most of these top-tier options. You should probably fade one or two of them as well. Not really rocket science. Just look at the rest of your pool, figure out where you need more exposure, and move on. But this cheap backup tight end range, right? Like, we play showdown slates all the time, right? And we're like, okay, backup tight ends are viable. When we get to these kind of slates where they're a little bit more expensive, right? They're not $200, no one plays them, right? And on like a 2-game slate, 1.6% ownership for Darnell Washington, 2.8% for Harrison Bryant is disrespectful. Heck, you can even throw Connor Hayward in there, who plays for the Steelers too. Steelers play a whole lot of their tight ends. I mean, Freiermuth plays pretty much every single snap. And then Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, both played, I think, like 20 snaps apiece last week too. If they score a touchdown for the Steelers, right, could be the optimal tight end, right? Price considered there at $2,700. Heck, they could even outscore Freiermuth and Njoku, right? We're not talking about players here that are projecting for all that many points. I mean, 9.3, 9.5 points here, right? A ceiling for them without a touchdown might be like 12, 13 fantasy points. You're not telling me that one of these tight ends down here can't outscore them. It gets 100% within their range of outcomes too. So when you're playing these showdown slates, or I just called it a showdown slate, it's a classic slate that we're talking about here, kind of got to treat them like a showdown slate, right? I was getting a little bit ahead of myself there. But like a Darnell Washington, if you are playing showdown tonight, you should 100% consider, because he's going to play, and he's a receiving massive tight end that at some point of his career, I'll just book it right now, he will be one of the top 10 fantasy tight ends in the league at some point. It probably won't be this year. He's extremely raw. I mean, you're talking about one of the rawest prospects that you've seen. Guys not even played tight end for that many years. He's like the Jimmy Graham, right, that comes from another sport and learns tight end. That's Darnell Washington, and he already made the team as a rookie. Not that much draft capital even invested into him, so he wasn't a guarantee to make the team. I like that, right? Connor Hayward, not so much. Washington's the one tight end if you're going to take a backup that I take from the Steelers. Harrison Bryant, you could say the same thing about. Let's see, Jordan Atkins would be like a third string, so I probably wouldn't take him. Who's Foster Moreau? He's over there for what? The Saints backup tight end? You could take it. What, Troutman? Is he? Yeah, Troutman's out, I guess. So there are a few value tier options you could take at tight end too, but I'm scattershotting it for the most part. There are a lot of these low-owned options that I'm going to have in like 7 to maybe 10% of my lineups, and just hope that I bank the right one that scores, right? Kind of like a showdown slate. You kind of got to deal with it that way. And then finally over here for defenses, you have some chalk there in the Saints. I think you could play the Steelers defense at 21%. In fact, I'm going to have all 4 defenses in my player pool. So defense is extremely random, right? If there's going to be a defensive touchdown, you're going to have it. If there's a team that gets like 2 fumble recoveries or in an interception, or perhaps, gets, I don't even know, safety, like there's a bunch of different ways, right, that these guys could get to the optimal lineup. You're going to have them. And it might even happen against one of the better offensive performances, right? It might be a team that posts 25 to 30 points tonight and then throws a pick 6, right? And that's how the defense gets into the optimal. So when it comes to my builds, I'm not going to have many roles set for the defenses, especially in my 150 max contests. I'm going to be just mixing and matching, swapping them in and out for a lot of different combinations, and hope that I hit the right one. That's a horrible cop-out answer for how to handle defenses, but really there's no rhyme or reason. to fading these guys, right? You could just fade the highest owned ones. You could say, okay, I'm not going to play the Saints defense. I'm going to play these bottom 3. They're cheaper. They're lower owned. I'm going to take that argument. But other than that, I don't see an argument at defense. Like you could try to be as cute as you want with your defensive analysis out there. It doesn't mean anything. I can just tell you, as somebody that does this week in and week out, defense is as random as anything out there in the NFL. So outside of that, I'll leave you with some closing remarks here. If you're playing in Showdown, right, go after the normal onslaught type of stacks. If you're going to go with a stack for the last game, obviously a Steelers stack with like Kenny Pickett, and then a couple wide receivers is probably going to be the contrarian way to play that. I'm going to play a few lineups for Showdown, especially for that game because I'm a huge Steelers fan. And of course, as a biased fan, that's how I'm going to attack that. So no surprise there. And then for the other game, screw the Browns, by the way, for all, just full disclosure, screw Cleveland. And then also we've got this Panthers versus Saints game. If you're going to play that, like you could go with a few onslaughts for the Panthers. I don't tend to agree with it. I'm playing the chalkier Saints side, but I'm really trying to switch it up, right? When it comes to like maybe my 3rd, 4th wide receiver, I think if you're going to take a few like just pure pivot options out there, like Shaheed at captain, I don't hate. I think that's like a weird way that you get to that slate. Or even at tight end, like just playing a lot of like Jawan Johnson. I feel like there's a few ways that you could attack that. So that's what I'm thinking for that slate. I'm thinking that that's probably some of the more contrarian options. I mean, the thing is, that first game, I don't even know if I'm going to play Showdown for, because like I'm not going to play contrarian Panther stacks. And I don't love the idea of just playing like a lot of chalk for the Saints. So that's why I'm kind of more focusing on the second game, obviously with my fandom there too. But yeah, just a few ideas over there for that end. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to go out there, build your lineups. Before you hopping out of here, smash that like button for me if you feel like it helped you out there a little bit. And also comment down below who you think is going to be the player that breaks the slate. And I'm not talking about, oh, Nick Chubb's going to score 25 points, or oh, Chris Olave, right, is going to score a lot of points. Come on. Let's be a little bit bold with our takes here. I'm talking about the player that's going to score that random touchdown that truly breaks the slate. And for me, I'll go ahead, be a little bit bold about it. It's Calvin Austin, right? If you couldn't tell, I really think that he's got a shot tonight, especially with Deontay Johnson out. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and let's go ahead and have ourselves a night. Of course, keep an eye out for all my main slate content this week. Also, some of the Showdown content that'll be dropping here over the next few days. We have no golf tournament this week, so I'll be a little bit more focused on the NFL side. And last week, took a little bit of a week off from the content, right? Was really busy with golf for like 9 months straight there. Had the whole week 1 ramp up when it came to the NFL. So last week, kind of took a little bit easy, but gonna be back to the full-time content grind this week. So looking forward to it. For access for all my projections, whether I'm posting on YouTube here or not, they're always posted on the Patreon, right? So if you're looking for access for my exposure for any given slate, that's always going to be posted over there on that side. So just know that. YouTube content, do it when I can, right? Obviously helps grow the channel, gives you guys all the insight that I can. And this week, going to be a little bit more of a regular thing. Appreciate the support here, guys. Until next time, best of luck, and I'll catch you guys later.